always follow your gut. Like if you can't trust your gut, then what can you trust? And every move that I made through my career, if I went to bed and I slept well, I knew it was the right decision.
Hey, what's up, people? It's Brandon Ferris, and you're listening to A Quick Read, an advertising podcast that talks book smarts and street smarts with the people who have been there, done that. Today's guest is creative director Chris Zieverink, who takes us on his digital creative journey designing for brands like Ford and Mars. Plus, we tell the truth about Seth Godin's All Marketers Are Liars. You know what to do. Tune in and turn up. What's up, Chris?
What's up, man? How you doing?
Doing good. Welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
This day was destined.
We've been trying to do it since the bourbon days.
So we started off this entire show with a guy I believe you've worked with in the past, Pat Morgan.
I've worked with Pat many times,
and he's one of your good buddies, right?
He is.
So his conversation was around a book by Seth Godin. And I find it interesting that you yourself picked a Seth Godin book. And today we're going to talk a little bit about All Marketers Are Liars. Now, are you just that much of a cynic, or did you really like the book?
No, I really did like the book, but I also, if you think about it, like when you got into this business, what did most people think you were trying to do? You're trying to sell them something. So they always thought, you're telling them a bunch of lies anyway. So it just kind of resonated from a title. Yeah. And then I just took it from there and just started getting into the book. And then it's been a while since I actually read that book. So I went back and listened to the book, and it's even better having Seth read it.
Yeah.
It's just, there's a lot of interesting pieces that come out when he's talking about it that you don't get from just reading it yourself. So it was pretty interesting.
That's awesome. So before we dig into some of those big ideas, let's get a little background. How does a guy like you get into advertising? Is this by choice? Did you fall into it? Were you hard up? Did you knock up a girl? You had to pay the bills? Tell us how you got there.
So I went to high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Pat's from Wisconsin as well. So that's how we bonded really quickly.
The cheese.
It's
all in the cheese.
But anyways, I graduated high school and I did not have a clue what I wanted to do. So I was like, I'll do architecture. As many creatives do, as they pick that as their profession, and
super accessible,
and a lot of money and a whole lot of time goes into that. And I just didn't, feel like college was the right place for me at the time. Going to all those other things. So I moved down to Cincinnati. My parents were already living down here. Moved back in with parents and decided I'm going to find an art school, at least an art school to go to. And I started looking around and was introduced to the Cincinnati Academy of Design, which unfortunately is no longer around, but I loved this school. I loved Mike. I loved everything about it. And, the rest is history. I went from there and took an internship at Barefoot in 1998.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
Yeah.
And
you're not new to the game. You're an old head, man. You're a veteran.
Old. Internet was barely around when I started.
Yeah. That's funny. So in that program, was it about advertising design? Was it an art school? What was the focus? And did you know really that you were going to end up doing everything from billboards to commercials to banner ads?
It was kind of a 2-year, 11-month out of the year program. And it was, first year was color theory, painting, just understanding everything that went into visuals. And then the second year was all around how to take those visuals and actually tell a story about them, bring them to life. And, and that's why this book is very, very much on point for that life. Is it started, in college, and now it's you still got to tell a great story, or else, what are you building?
Yeah. So you get out of design school. You said you interned at Barefoot. Then what? Where did your journey take you? And did you get a job somewhere as a designer, a junior? Did you work your way up the ranks? Talk a little bit about that.
My first job was junior designer at HSR Business to Business.
Okay.
Which is currently Gyro.
Yeah, a little B2B.
I went from doing, my first website at Barefoot, where I just kind of started to understand what was going on for the Masonette Group, which used to be, big around here.
Yeah. Restaurant group.
Yeah.
Doing the fancy stuff.
Yeah, Le Normandy.
The snails and
yeah.
the caviars.
And then went up to do business to business at HSR. I was there for probably 7 years.
Okay.
And then
and while you were there, are you just grinding it out? You're just like designing stuff all the time.
Doing print, doing a lot of print work and basically doing whatever anybody asked, really.
Yeah.
And then I started getting some ground, and then this thing called the internet came around, and they started a new division there. And me and one other guy not really left the company, but left what we were doing to just do internet full time. And that's kind of how it started. And that's where I fell in love with doing just digital. So
that's where the digital design journey began.
That is
now,
where it began.
back in the day, were they using the terms UX and UI and CX and all the X's?
Nobody had an idea what that was.
All they had was the triple X.
Oh yeah, that's where all the good stuff came from, right? Like video on demand. So, but no, it was it's been a long time, but that was more, websites had to fit in, the whole website 5 megs.
Gotcha.
And you're doing 30-page websites that are fitting into very, very small file size. So it's not very image heavy, more content heavy, not anything like what we do today.
So you end up, getting pretty good at that, and you land at sort of your first big stint where you were for several years at Rockfish, right?
No, actually, before even Rockfish, I went to, I left HSR, somebody that used to work there during the .com days, bubble burst. They were either laid off or left. I can't remember which one. Brought me down to Bridge. So
okay.
I went to Bridge Worldwide after that.
Is that where you met Pat?
That is where I met Pat. I think so.
So you guys ended up on the same bridge together. Yeah.
No, I met a lot of great people at HSR. I mean, I'm still friends with a lot of the people that were there. I'm married to one of them that I used to work with, and there was a lot of great people there. But I felt like I hit a ceiling there that I couldn't get above, so I left. And I told my wife, and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to this little company." That was probably about 30 people, leaving an agency that had like 120 at the time. Yeah. And she was like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." Had an interview down there with, a great mentor. I would say a great mentor for me, Peter Schwartz. He took faith in me right away just from the first interview. And, he's like, "I don't care what we have to do. I'm going to bring you on." He brought me on, and, I stayed there for probably 8 years, close to.
At Rockfish?
At Bridge.
At Bridge, sorry.
Yeah, and then through being bought, Bridge got bought by WPP.
Okay, so you were in the big guns there
twice. Yeah. So Bridge got bought by WPP. The leadership started to change. Things were shuffling around. It didn't feel as like it used to. I got one of the guys that worked at Bridge decided to leave, and I said, "Hey, if they need a creative director, let me know."
Yeah.
3 weeks later, I was working at Rockfish.
There you go.
That's where I was until, VML, Y&R, and all those things happened. And then now I have my own place. So the own place is great. Craft and Create is doing well. It's, it's awesome to run something by yourself, for yourself, but I'm not, I have a partner, and, myself and Dom do really good work. We've always worked well together. And we said, let's do this for ourselves. And that's what we did.
And there you are.
That's where I'm
Here
at
you
now.
are in your journey. Excellent, man. So this brings us to the first big idea of the book. So one of the things that Seth talks about is he talks about how in marketing we're all telling stories, right? We're telling these stories that may be true, they may not be true, but the whole point is whoever tells this story the best can convince people to sort of buy into a certain lifestyle, product, service, etc. One of the things he outlines in his book, sort of. Several steps, he's got 5 steps that the book's based on, and we'll focus on a couple. But one of them is this idea of first impressions start the story, and he says a first impression causes the consumer to make a very quick, permanent judgment about what he just was exposed to or she was exposed to. So, how has first impressions been a factor in your career, whether it's one of your past clients or something you're working on now with your own gig, where how important is it with design and creative direction to land that first impression on a consumer, or even pitching the work? How do you make that first impression when you're pitching that work?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's with some of the clients that we have now, it was not just that first impression. It was getting in and making people have confidence in what you're pitching and talking about, but then also inviting you back for more meetings. And, so it takes a little bit longer to get people to trust a new agency, especially a small new agency.
Yeah.
But once they do, we have had nothing but great reviews from everybody that we've worked with so far. And hopefully, through those conversations that they're going to have with others, we're going to continue to get new work, new opportunities. But it all came down to that first impression. They got referred to us by somebody that I had a meeting with.
Right.
And that meeting just turned into another meeting, and then that meeting turned into work, which was great. The first impressions are very important. Like first time I met you, I was like, hey, I like that guy.
Doesn't happen a lot.
He's just as goofy as I am, but when it comes down to work, you know your stuff.
Yeah.
And when you know your stuff, you can usually get people to surround you and do what you looking to do and looking to accomplish. So
yeah. So you mentioned work. Is there a piece of work that you remember in your career where either you guys just nailed it and it was like the consumer fell in love with it and it just made a great first impression and it flew off the shelves, or vice versa? Was there anything that you guys just bombed where you thought you had it figured out and then it got launched into the world and the consumers were just like hating on it? Like, do you have, one or the other?
Oh, probably thousands. Probably thousands of the latter. Of like, this was a great idea on paper. Boy, does it suck when you produce it. I wish I could pinpoint something like that. I'm sure anybody that listens to this that knows me is gonna comment and what about this and what about that? There's so many. We've had lots of good success, and I've been fortunate to have the opportunities that I've had at different agencies that I've worked at, and met lots and lots of way more talented people than I am. But yeah, I'm trying to think of just one instance of you mentioned Ford. We pitched Ford for months, 3 or 4, maybe even longer months, just to kind of get in the door. Once we were in the door, it was like, okay, they trust us now. And we took in lots of different things in lots of different ways. And, and I eventually got myself off of that project completely, but it was still just crazy.
So it sounds like in that experience, even once you get in the door, you have to keep making that impression. You have to keep pitching the work. You have to keep selling, hey, we deserve to be here. Was that an experience that you would agree with in working with a big brand like that? It's not just about getting the first project, it's like staying relevant and keeping the project? Yeah,
it's all about once you're in the door, you're not safe. There's always somebody trying to come in and take that work away from you, or do it cheaper, faster, or different than what you're proposing. Big companies like that one, they're IT structures and different things. There's probably 7 different divisions all held together by duct tape and Band-Aids, but there's a lot of different stuff going on. So you're always trying to sell, but you're always trying to protect as well. Yeah. And that's a whole different feeling from, where I'm at right now. I feel pretty secure with all the clients that we have and the people that we talk to. It was one of the things that I missed when I was at the agency world, is I missed talking to clients every day. I missed, that interaction time that I was having, with people that ran the companies, were part of the companies that, where this really matters to them.
Yeah.
So
I think, you make an impression with a brand that you're working with from an agency side, or working with that brand, you make a great impression on a consumer, you launch a product or whatnot. But in order to keep engaged, to keep things moving forward, one of the things Seth points out in the book is great marketers tell stories we believe. He says, consumers make a prediction about what will happen next. Consumers will rationalize anything that doesn't match that prediction. So in your career, as you think about this idea of telling these stories people can believe, what is your process as a creative director, when you're working with your team, trying to push young designers, writers, et cetera, to tell stories people are going to believe?
Yeah, it took me a long time to trust, younger talent until I got to Bridge. Like once I got to Bridge and people trusted, here I was pretty young when I started, started there. I didn't have any kids and, didn't know all that world of adulting. But once I understood it, like just pushing, somebody said to me once, and I can't remember who it was, said to me like, your team should not be you.
Yeah.
They should be means for you to express what you're trying to do and let them express it their own ways. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Like they're not going to do it the way I want. I'm going to do it. They're going to do it the way they want to do it, but they're going to do it the way that we're asking, but with their own, interpretation, if you will, of that ask. So it took a long time for me to get to that point, especially as a young creative director, and especially a young creative director in digital, trying to make us, storytelling, which is, if you think about it, like commercials, it's pretty easy to do storytelling. In digital, it's a lot harder. It's, I feel like it's a lot harder to do that storytelling in digital, but once you figure out how to do it and get that, established first look view down, it all comes together great. In being a designer, web sucks to do great design on unless you have great writing too. So you always have to have that marriage of both. And it took me a long time to learn that as well. It's like, you can't make bad words look good. You can't make good design read well if you don't have both.
Yeah.
So
did you find yourself in those phases as you were learning to become a creative director, wanting to just hop in the chair and just take over and be like, look, just do this? Like, did you find yourself having to fight against that?
Every day. I still fight against it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I love designing. I mean, that's why I started a new company, was to go back to doing that and to kind of get to where I was doing not just design, but still having that client relationship, figuring out the business standpoint. I would say we're getting better at the business part. We're really good at the creative part.
Yeah. Would you say that, when we talk about the stories, and telling stories, believing stories, I often, think that we tell ourselves stories on who we are, who we think we are. Do you think that in the larger agency environment, you felt like maybe you were living the wrong story? Like you were a maker, you wanted to get closer to the work, you wanted to have more interaction with that? Or is that something that was unexpected? You didn't know that until you got there, and then you were like, man, I really miss this. I guess, what was it? Talk a little bit about that. What did you like about being further away from the work? And then what did you hate about being further away from the work?
Yeah, so being further away from the work, from an aspect of like creative directing, was more around, I missed the work tremendously. I loved to get into design, but I knew that it was what I had to do to grow was to take on other responsibilities for the company, like do the business part, the brainstorming part, the brief part. Getting all of those pieces done was a great way to just round out who I was as a creative, to where I knew I was going to use those every day. But I miss designing a lot. And I love designing. I sit with my kids, we draw, we do all kinds of different things like that. But I still miss that delivering something that makes somebody, happy to pay you, basically.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And I think that, as I talk to other creatives and have these types of conversations, I think sometimes where we hold ourselves back is we tell ourselves a story that we think that limits us. Did you ever find yourself in your career feeling limited by your own sort of constraints of, well, that's not really me. I'm this type of guy, or I'm this type of creative, or this type of designer, or were you? And if so, how did you get beyond that? Or are you still wrestling with those sort of things?
No, I wrestle with it every day. Still to this day. Design was something that I've done my whole life, even before, just sitting down with, box of crayons and figuring stuff out. But still, it's one of those things where if I didn't do this, I don't know what I would be doing.
Yeah.
That's how much it is of me. To where if I didn't go into this profession, I'm pretty sure if I still stayed in Milwaukee and hung out with the friends that I hung out with, I would have a whole different life. And it wouldn't involve doing creative. If it didn't involve doing creative, I don't know what it would be.
Yeah. What's a project? If you take a minute and just think for a second, what was the last project where you were in the work, you felt like you were in your story, you were in your moment, you were doing your thing, your hands were active, you were making the design, you were using your new skills that you learned through leading and creative leadership and talking with clients, et cetera. But take us to that project and maybe break it down as not necessarily a case study, but talk a little bit about why that project was meaningful to you.
Man, I'd have to think. Well, like we work for a security company right now, and they're great clients. They are, they're wonderful to work with, but they're still kind of stuck in that situation where they want to be bigger.
Yeah.
But they don't want to lose that family aspect, which, you have to respect, right? Like,
yeah,
they love their employees. They don't want to be so big that they lose track of who their employees are, but they also want to grow. So they hired us to kind of help them figure out how to get work done faster. So we're building apps for them. iPad app that goes out into the field. They do all of their inspection on. It's all calculated, is kept through. And what we basically have done is, tried to figure out a way to prove out ROI on that app so that they get a return on their investment. And that return on investment is basically how they pay for the app, because we're going to allow them to do more things in the field and get more inspections done. It's been a long process, but it's a great piece of work, and it's for a great company. And I would say, like, in all the years that I was at Rockfish, we did a lot of great work. Whether it was Walmart, Mars, all the different clients that we worked with there. It still wasn't as fulfilling as doing an inspection app, because the inspection app it's got meaning behind it. It's not just telling a story for story's sake. It's telling a story that somebody can go and use. It actually makes their job easier. It makes their job, it allows them to do more. It allows them to get paid more. It's got a fulfillment to it. Even at the end of the day, they get to go, use, and it makes them feel good using it. So,
do you think as a creative, that fulfillment increases the smaller the brand is, or the closer you are to the whole operation? Meaning, you just mentioned, I'm assuming this organization, you're talking with the people who own it or run it or at the top. And I'm sure you were, in your career working with larger brands, whether it be Ford, Walmart, or whoever, you were probably talking with people that had, tremendous power and say. But at the end of the day, it's such a large entity, and you were probably working on such a small component to that large entity. So that's what I'm hearing. Do you find that to be true? The smaller the client, the potential greater fulfillment, or is that just a myth?
It's probably a little bit of truth in there somewhere, but there's probably a little myth in there as well. I mean, it all depends. Like, what are you doing for that company? What are you getting in and doing? Are you redoing their corporate website where everybody that touches it from a corporate perspective is going to go, oh, look at this, is nice and new and shiny? Or are you doing a division, like through the days that I was at Bridge, we probably launched and redid 38 P&G brands.
Wow.
And worked, everything from Homemade Simple to all the other brands, whatever it happened to be. But like, I think I redesigned Swiffer 3 times while I was there. You know what I mean? Like, and, cause like the brand, even when you fulfill everything to a T for a brand manager, that brand manager leaves, the next one comes on, they want to redo it.
Well, and it's kind of a dusty brand, right? So it takes a while you got to redo it every year.
Yeah, it's a dusty brand.
There you go. That's why I'm here. I bring in those type of comments. Man, that's just really interesting. I love talking and hearing different people's experience. As far as, again, when you think about those stories, is there a story for you that like you've thought about stepping into? I mean, obviously you're in the midst of this new chapter, right? You're doing your own company, your own thing. Is there something else that you're like, because what I know to be true about creatives is creatives have like all sorts of things happening at once, right? So you got side projects and side hustles for your side hustle, that sort of thing. Is there anything that, now that you're sort of starting to live the truth of your current, company, is there anything that you're like, okay, well, here's how we can build on that, or here's the next thing I'm kind of starting to tinker with?
Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to figure out how to, grow.
Yeah.
Because like that's a big, and I don't feel like it's a super important thing to have happen right now, just because I think what we're doing, being small has been great. So we're always trying to figure out like, what can we do? Do we merge with others? Do we, figure out how to bring on some employees, things like that are always on top of mind of like how to grow. But here's a funny story. My wife and my kids and wanted to go skiing, so we went skiing. I suck at it. I've never skied in my life, and they loved it. But my legs going 4 different ways does not agree with me, and especially as I got older, and like my first time skiing was like 45 years old. That's not a great first time.
It hurts.
And yeah, I mean, it was miserable, but like I tell you that story because like for me, I thought like I could get on skis and just do it.
Yeah.
I've never not been able to, I can skateboard still, I can do all these other things, but getting on skis, not me. But yeah, getting out and doing something new, I thought that was what I was going to do. No, that wasn't what I was going to do. That day was, is still embedded, ingrained into my brain of like, that's a failure. That was a miserable failure. So, and I'm always open to try, wanting to try new things, do new things. I always thought I wanted to be a graffiti artist, and I was like, yeah, I suck at spray painting, but I'm really good at painting.
Yeah.
Just not really good at spray painting. But, design is just one of those things you got to get out and try a bunch of things, and do what makes you happy. And I was at the end of my Rockfish VML Y&R days. I just found like I was just not happy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a bad work thing, and it wasn't a, what are you expecting me to do thing? It was, I wanted to keep my team busy, keep them billable, because that was very important for what the time of the, what was happening inside of Rockfish becoming VML. That was very, very important. So I did that, but at the same time, it was the grind of that was, I'm not happy, so I got to go find something new to do.
Yeah. And I think that's such an interesting insight, because I think there's people listening to the show who are, they're at the top of their game, right? They're working at Ogilvy and they're working at Leo Burnett or whatever, and they've somehow come across the path of this show and they're tuning in. And then there's a lot of people who are just on the come up, like they're graduating school, like when you were out of design school. And there's probably a bunch of people who are right there, right in the middle, where they're working at cool agencies and smaller markets and that sort of thing. And so I think oftentimes we look at other people's stories or their journeys and we think like, man, like you're on top of the game. You're at this like holding company level agency doing cool work with this stuff. And, you're the man, your portfolio's dope, your work looks good. Everybody thinks you're, cool and they want to network with you. And then yet there you are sitting saying to yourself, man, am I really happy?
Right.
So I find that interesting. So I guess, what do you say to those people listening in who think or have the mindset that the grass is always greener, right? Because you've come up in the game, you've worked at smaller agencies, you went to the bigger agencies, you're working on big brands with big names, yet here you are wondering, is this what I want? So
right.
What about that grass is greener philosophy of, is there another story that I should be chasing that you would want to say to young creatives or maybe those who are just in the midst of transition right now?
Yeah, I mean, always follow your gut. Like if you can't trust your gut, then what can you trust? Yeah. And, every move that I made through my career, if I went to bed and I slept well, I knew it was the right decision.
Yeah.
And, I've had pieces of work that have kept me up all night when you're sitting there dreaming about navigation, you're like, oh, this is terrible. And like, I'm up dreaming about navigation right now. But there's those times where you're like, take the chance. If you're young, take the chance, especially if you're getting offered something that you truly feel is going to be a better situation for you, take the chance.
Gotcha.
And, if it doesn't pay out, there's always other chances.
Yeah. And that chance might not only be joining a big shop, it might mean starting your own, right?
It could, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think I would like working from home. We're being forced to right now, and I still don't really like working from home. I mean, I like being there. I like the whole aspect of like it's my company kind of thing. But I do truly miss like the interaction of people every day.
Yeah.
And I'll get back. I mean, we'll get back there, and then everybody will get back there. But it's, there's so much Zooming you can do, and there's so much, there's so many other things you can do. But always trust your gut.
Yeah. And I think that brings me to kind of a final big idea that I extracted from Seth's book is this idea of marketers with authenticity thrive, right? So when we're looking at storytelling and what we're selling or who we're becoming, authenticity is often a factor that can be very powerful. In the book, he says sometimes marketing is so powerful it can actually change the worldview of someone who experiences it. What's been your experience around authenticity? Have you ever had a moment, a mentor, a brand experience, something where you were just like, wow, that's the real deal? And then on the other side of that, maybe there's a moment you can think of where you're just like, oh man, this was a train wreck and I smelled it a mile away because it felt phony from the get-go. Talk about authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky word when you get into advertising because you're trying to make everybody feel like you're being authentic. But there are brands out there that truly are. Like we worked with at Rockfish, like Pappy and Company, which is like the offshoot of old Rip Van Winkle, Pappy Van Winkle.
Gotcha.
And came up with a great equity triangle, great just like manifesto, like everything the brand should stand for. And one of their key beliefs was, being authentic, and how they measured that was going to be pretty awesome when we launched the website. So everything had a story behind it.
Yeah.
And it was just a great little piece of work. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount of money. It wasn't, but it was one of those things still to this day, when you look back on it, it's like, man, that was a great just piece of work for what was for building a brand. I mean, we took a little tiny brand that was making some money online to making it a really great brand that's making quite a bit of money online. Yeah. Now, I would never be able to tell you how much they make because I have no idea, but they are still living that authenticity story that we set up for them in a brainstorm with them 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. Did you get to reap the benefits of that project?
No.
With the bourbon?
No,
you didn't get the...
I do that on my own.
You didn't get the vats and barrels that you dreamed about?
The stories, right? No, I wish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's really cool because I can think back to and man, it's so much more fulfilling. We talked about fulfillment earlier, but it is fulfilling when you work with a brand who, they are who they say they are,
Yeah.
And when that authenticity is there, just the work feels more true and interesting. What you put out to the world it's proud versus, there's been brands that I think we've all touched where, yes, technically what you're saying is technically true from some angle, maybe.
I mean, look at when you go and pitch like a cigarette brand, like it's just bad.
Yeah,
it's gonna feel bad even trying to sell them on something that like is really cool and really good. It's just bad. Yeah. And that's why you don't see that stuff anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just an over. There's brands where no matter how authentic you're going to be, it's still a bad idea.
Yeah,
because of what it is.
Because it's broken. The thing's broken itself.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Do you think that authenticity, that idea, again, a lot of Seth's books talking about marketing and he's talking about brands and selling stuff, but I think, a lot of these books that we talk about on this show really have a lot to do with just creatives in general, right?
Yeah.
Like how do we learn from each other and our experience. How important is that authenticity factor working in the creative field? You have a partner with Dom, and you've worked on big teams, you worked on small teams. How much of a difference can it make to have a team that's authentic versus, maybe having to work with somebody who you really don't feel is bringing their true self forward. Maybe they feel a little fake. What can that do to the work?
Well, I mean, if you're working with somebody that feels like they're not bringing their A game, it makes it feel like everybody is working harder. But I think, being on big teams for me was sometimes not very good because it brought out it sometimes brought out the worst in me. And I know that. And that's something that I had to work on for a long time of like, very passionate person, very, very passionate about the work. And it would come out probably in ways that it shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And I, those are things that I've had to work on my whole career and life. But
do you think that's because there was more, I guess, social equity to fight for because it's being divided across more people, and you felt like you needed to be heard, and you were trying to find ways to do that versus on a small team, it's really just a couple voices? Or what do you think drove that? That's kind of an interesting insight that you saw about yourself.
I don't know what drove it. What ended up, the outcome of it was, I mean, when you got into like bigger teams, think about when the internet started. There was a designer, a writer, a programmer, and maybe an account person or two. And that's who you divided that money with to fulfill what the client's ask was. And now you look at what you're doing now.
Data, research, strategy, analytics, 13 planner.
13 or 14 different slivers.
Project management, account management, design, copy.
The same
content.
The same exact ask, and you're asked to do it in a much smaller, faster, scale. But when it got to be like that complicated, it's just like, look, the client's just looking for a redesign. They're not even really looking for the copy to be rewritten. They just wanted to have a new, fresher look on it. And it's like, we don't really need all of this.
Yeah, the whole thing.
And that's kind of what I like about what I'm doing now is like I can go in and ask those questions. Do you want to improve this? Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
And get those answers and get the right people in place for them versus them paying for things that they might not necessarily need now.
Yeah.
So I do like that. But, we all have a place to play in what we do.
Yeah.
And it's just finding that place. And often I would jump out of my place.
Well, now that the place is yours, I'll spin it back on you. So we'll use this to measure your growth maybe several years from now. What are you going to do now differently? As you talked about, you want to look into growing, craft and create as you scale or grow or join up with another shop. What did you learn in your past career, early in your career, the things that you're like, I'm going to do this a little differently? And what are those things? Give me one thing. What's the one big thing where you're like, you know what? I got to change the way I do this if we're going to be successful.
I have worked tremendously on just being able to talk.
Yeah.
And have the tough conversations, especially when it comes, when you're owning your own place, it's like, hey, when it comes down to finances, you're like, hey, you're late on this. I need this.
Yeah.
I think even with the new company, we've gotten letting a few people get away with some of that stuff of like, they're not ready to pay. We, cut them some slack, do that. But it's usually like people that we know. I'm not going to call anybody out, but
pay your bills, people.
Pat Morgan. Just kidding. But yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's gotten down to, it's just changed. I had to change my mindset and do a mind shift on myself of it's not all about me anymore. Cause like when I'm at a big agency and you're collecting a paycheck, it is about that, but it's also about the team. And now it's, it's taking care of not only myself and Dom, both of our families. We got a lot riding on this.
Yeah.
We took a big chance taking out of, both jumping out of VMLY&R, both coming into doing this for ourselves. Our moonlighting was this, and it became the real thing. And, I'm 100% behind making it succeed. And I don't think I've ever been 100% into anything from a career wise until now.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been into it to make, the companies grow and,
Sure.
do the late nights, do whatever it takes, do the 100-hour weeks, whatever it happened to be. But when it's 100% yours,
Yeah.
you put 100% of yourself and
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more into that. And
Well, one of the things I learned is, and again, I'm a small bit of ownership in various things along the way. And what I learned is you own the profit, but you also own the loss.
yeah, and it's a hard hitting fact, isn't it?
And
It hurts.
nobody wants to talk about that side of ownership. People think of, jobs and careers and, one day I want to be an owner, I want to be a partner. Well, sometimes the partner takes out loans to like make payroll.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
and-
it's not a sexy thing people talk about. You talk about it as if that you're only going to profit. But who knows, man? The things happen, pandemics. Next thing you know, you're wondering what the heck's going on. So I think that's an interesting insight. But I think another question I think listeners would want to hear from you specifically, because we haven't had any sort of designers or creative directors that have really delved a lot of their life into UX UI.
Yeah.
So as we talked about some of these ideas, obviously, but how does some of that stuff change in a world where it's like your design, it is design, but it's like design attached to like the way people do things and push buttons? Like, how does that change the importance or the story or the conversation we're having? Just I guess to make the question clear and simple, how do you tell authentic stories about brands that move people with a design canvas that involves navigation and button pushing? Like, how does that work?
It's interesting. Yeah, that's a hard question.
It's like a moving target, right? Because you're like,
trends alone change every year.
yeah,
Like how, this year it's going to be skeuomorphic or, something like that. And you're just like, oh, are we going to get the app done in time so that this is still relevant?
yeah,
But it's a hard question to answer. It really is. Cause when you got, if you think about 10 years ago, it was, how do we get a budget to do custom photography for this website that will only be used on this website? And people are like, oh no, use stock. And it's like, well, that's not really authentic to the story, right?
yeah,
And I remember having, plenty of knockdown battles about budget just to do that, just to do a photo shoot or to do a video shoot or to do just a tabletop shoot of just the product so that it was different and told a different story and helped tell a different story than what was being seen on TV. Maybe it didn't tell a different story, but it continued that story online so that it wasn't, so we didn't feel like there was two different things going on for the same brand. It all kind of lived in an ecosystem of like the story.
Yeah.
And that story might not have been set up by the agency that you're working in. It might have came out of New York or California or Houston or whoever you're working with. But like for digital and digital storytelling, like if you have other pieces going on, equity is so important.
yeah,
And making sure that equity is consistent. I'm working on a project right now. I wish I could talk about it, but their equity is so authentic. It's really, it really is the core of why that brand exists. And hopefully, we can come back and have a conversation about that. But it's one of those things where if that authenticity is lost even on just one page or one piece, it's just gone.
yeah. So it sounds like to
And I don't know if I answered your
no,
question.
no. I think it was great. And what I extracted from that was, if you're going to stay in business and the design space around UX, UI, and these new features and functions and mobile this, mobile that, what I heard was you've got to master the art of continuing to tell a brand equity story in the midst of a changing canvas.
Yeah, adapt. adapt.
So, yeah.
I mean,
adapt
you
or
have
die.
to be if you're going to go into digital and you're young, be prepared to be adaptable because you have to be able to change at a moment's notice. And sometimes it
Yeah.
feels, quicker than others, but like styles, user interactions. I mean, remember when Flash was around?
Yeah.
And everybody loved Flash. Well, Flash sucked. I mean, it sucked. It was the hardest thing. And, you had your couple key people that were really
Yeah.
good at it. But when HTML5 came around, everybody was like, oh,
Yeah, the shiny new thing.
let's adapt.
And there's always the shiny new thing.
There always will be.
Sitting as a person who's sat in the big holding companies, do you think a lot of those changes where we see brands, get absorbed and change this, is that because of that adapting? Are they're responding to the market? Oh, we're no longer doing it this way. So this group that was built on that now needs to shift over here. Is that kind of what it looks like on the inside for somebody who's worked there?
At a big agency?
Yeah. When you're in that holding company world, are those shifts and changes, is it more about adapting to the changing market, or is it really just a financial play of who's profitable and who's not?
I guess it depends because like Rockfish was really good at digital. And we got, and then it became, more e-commerce, and e-commerce became the niche that you could hold on to, especially when you go into a big holding company where, guess what? There's 14 of you in that holding company, just all different around the world. It's just, you got to be able to carve out what you're really good at and carve out what you can own. And that was kind of another one of those situations where you're like, oh, are we going to be okay? We ultimately we're going to be okay, but like it was definitely like carve out the pieces that you can own. And the reason I left Bridge to go to Rockfish was just the thought of doing something. I was the fourth employee in Cincinnati, and it was just exciting to go and do something completely new, start something. There was offices in Dallas and in Rogers, Arkansas. But for here, it was like there was 5, 6, 7, 8 of us quickly. And that's how, it stayed that size for a little bit. And it was fun. It was like having a startup that was funded by 2 other agency, locations. So it had like a really cool feel about it and had fun about it. But it was also like kind of scary because you're, taking a leap and going somewhere new, but not to put in your agency's name, but.
So, I think as we talk about being in advertising, and we've sort of reflected a little bit upon, Seth's book and hinted at some of the things he talked about. Here's my final question as it regards to the book for you, and I'll phrase it towards advertising in general. What do you think's the biggest lie about advertising?
That it's easy. It's not easy. Not everybody can do this job. It's not easy. It's not for everybody. But the ones that it is for and the ones that like it, love it.
Yeah.
But it is not an easy profession.
Yeah, I think people oftentimes look at us and they're like, you do what? Like, you guys are...
Oh, that sounds so
yeah,
fun.
you guys are just, making fun stuff, and you have a culture where you can, have a bourbon at the end of the day or whatever. And like,
You guys have a kegerator in your office?
Yeah, I get so many people that, that say that, people that aren't in this world.
Yeah.
And then what they don't understand is like, this thing is built on like soul crushing. It's built on you bringing ideas forward and people telling them they're not good enough.
People that may not have the right to even tell you that, telling you that they're not good enough.
But it's a beautiful thing because at some point you come to really appreciate that. And like, I think you will, again, we talked about authenticity. You would probably much rather have a soul crushing, authentic critique that's going to make your work better than to somebody just to come glad hand you and say, oh, you're so cool.
Yeah, I'd much rather pitch a client on an idea that is authentic and out there than one that'll get bought and you're just going to be miserable bringing to life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we can do that all day long. That's really easy to sell somebody, what they want or what they've asked for. But how can you take what they've asked for and make it better?
Yeah.
make it more on brand, make it more authentic, give them some ideas that they didn't think of and like, oh, I would have never thought of that. That's the best response ever.
Yeah.
Is, oh, I would have never thought of that. That's perfect. You know, when you get those kind of responses, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. That's
makes
cool.
Makes you feel like you did your job. You know, we did a pitch at Valvoline one day and there was 9 people approving work. And you're just like, oh man, we got to get this locked down. How do you get 9 people to get down to one idea? And, you know, through conversation and getting them to talk, you can.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're definitely figuring some things out, and you got this journey with
always learning
with Craft and Create. How do people work with you? You know, people have, you know, listened in. They're like, okay, this guy's interesting. He's got some things to say and a point of view, and maybe they go, where do they find you? How do they connect with you? That sort of thing.
Well, craftandcreate.co is our website. You can always get on there. Our Facebook page, Instagram. All of them link to either a hello email or my personal email or Dom's personal email. And yeah, just start the conversation that way. Cause I mean, all of the work that we've got so far, we haven't hunted for it. It's all been word of mouth or just through somebody being happy and referring us.
Relationships.
Yeah.
And you guys work directly with clients, but you also work for agencies too, right?
We do. So we kind of have like 2 sides of our business. So one of the sides is agency overflow. Basically, when an agency gets jammed up, has too many deliverables of their own, they can call us. We're, you know, I would like to think that we're pretty well connected. Just being in the city for this long, you kind of know and, you know, meet everybody through whether it's like things like the Addies or other kind of convention meetings like that. And then, so the agency overflow side of the business is fun. Like, cause that's, you know, you get to go back in and work with people and do other kinds of things and different kinds of asks. And then we have our own side of the business, which is our pure, like they're our clients. We do all kinds of different work. Had to jump back into print, you know, once or twice this year.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's one of those things where that's what's kind of exciting about being a small shop is you can kind of take on things and figure some stuff out. But if I were to say, hey, what is Craft and Create really good at? We're really good at taking complex, creative problems and making them user-friendly.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
That's great. And I think that's also a great summary of, you know, when we talk about marketing, you know, and as, you know, Seth talks about in his book here is when you can take complex things in life and tell simple, beautiful stories that people can cling on to, then typically they buy in.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, the simpler you can make somebody, you know, understand something, the more that they're going to grasp to it and take it and do something with it. So, and, you know, I wouldn't have even come up with that, but through conversations with people in my life that have, you know, aren't in design, more on strategy, they're like, you're just really, really good at this complex part and making it easy. So like, we just kind of locked onto that and, you know, it's been true and we love it. And like, it's a really good piece of, business. And it was, you know, one of those things where somebody said it and I'm like, shit, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think it's been a fun, interesting, complex, yet simple conversation. And I thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been quite the journey. I'm still, you know, finding my way with what this show is, but I think that what's interesting is everybody brings such a unique point of view of what creativity is, what creative direction is, what advertising is. And it just means a lot that you came and hung out with me.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. And we'll keep doing this every other Tuesday. We're bringing you brand new shows. They drop at 6 a.m. every other Tuesday, so it works out for your commute. And then on the off weeks, we publish a segment called The Bookmark, where I will reflect upon the previous week's episode, look forward to the future week's episode, and then share some listener feedback. So join with us on Instagram at A Quick Read Podcast. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Subscribe on Spotify and iTunes because that helps us get exposure. But yeah, man, thanks so much, guys, for listening. I hope you enjoy the show. And Chris, as always, man, I appreciate you, and you've been a mentor to me. And you always,
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
You always pick up the phone when I call, so that's half the battle. A lot of people don't. I call, they see my number, and then it goes straight.
It might have
to
been the
voicemail.
beard.
Well, the beard's gone now, so I don't know. Maybe I'm not in. But again, man, I appreciate you, and we'll see you next time we have you on.
Awesome, man. I appreciate
All
it.
right, cheers, mate.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, head over to iTunes or Spotify and give us a great rating and review. A Quick Read is a Leap Group podcast.